The pristine white Porsche sat in my cow pasture like a foreign invader. Mud caked its chrome wheels. Fresh manure decorated its hood. And Karen stood at the fence line, screaming threats while my cattle watched with curious eyes. 20 minutes earlier, she had demanded I move her car immediately. She threatened lawsuits, police reports, and everything short of divine intervention. But I just smiled and handed her the mud boots I keep by the barn door. "You wanted convenient parking on my property," I said calmly. "Well, there it is." Her face turned 3 shades of red as she realized what had happened. This was not some accident. This was not some misunderstanding. This was calculated, legal, and absolutely perfect revenge. But to understand how we got here, I need to take you back to where it all started. Back to the morning when this entitled city woman decided my family farm was her personal parking lot. My name is Tom, and I am a third-generation farmer. My grandfather built this place with his own hands back in 1952. Every fence post, every barn board, every stone in the foundation represents decades of honest work and family sweat. The farm sits on 47 acres of rolling hills about 15 minutes outside the city limits. We raise cattle mostly, with some seasonal crops and a small vegetable garden that feeds half the county at harvest time. It is not glamorous work, but it is good work. The kind that lets you sleep sound at night knowing you have earned every dollar. My daily routine starts before sunrise. I check on the cattle, make sure they have fresh water, and move them to different pastures depending on the season. The old farmhouse where I live is the same one my grandfather built, and my father expanded when he took over the operation. 3 generations of our family have called this place home. The property borders a state highway on one side, but you would never know it from the house. Tall oak trees and a long gravel driveway keep the road noise to a minimum. Most days, the only sounds you hear are cattle lowing, birds singing, and the occasional tractor rumbling across the fields. Over the past few years, development has crept closer to our little corner of the world. A new shopping center went up about a mile down the highway, complete with chain restaurants, a big box store, and enough parking spaces to host a county fair. The increased traffic means more people getting lost, more folks turning into our driveway by mistake. Usually, lost drivers are polite about it. They apologize for the confusion, ask for directions, and go on their way. I have helped dozens of people over the years, even jumped a few dead batteries and changed a tire or two. Rural hospitality runs deep in my family. But something about that new shopping center seemed to attract a different kind of person. The entitled kind. The kind who thinks the whole world exists for their convenience. I should have seen the trouble coming when I started noticing more expensive cars turning into our driveway. Not lost drivers looking for help, but people who seemed to think our property was some kind of shortcut or rest stop. Most of them would turn around quickly when they realized this was a working farm, not a public park. The morning everything changed started like any other. I woke up at 5:30, made coffee in the same pot my grandmother used, and stepped outside to check on the cattle. The sun was just starting to peek over the eastern hills, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. That is when I saw it. A gleaming white Porsche SUV parked directly in front of my main barn entrance. At first, I thought someone might be having car trouble. Maybe they needed help or directions. But as I walked closer, I could see the vehicle was empty. No emergency flashers, no signs of distress. Just an expensive car sitting exactly where it had no business being. The parking job was not accidental either. The Porsche was positioned perfectly to block my access to the barn where I keep the feed for my cattle. This was not someone who had pulled over in a panic or confusion. This was deliberate. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. In 38 years of living on this farm, I had never encountered anything quite like this. The Porsche looked completely out of place against the backdrop of weathered barn siding and farm equipment. The vehicle was immaculate. Not a speck of dust on the paint, not a scratch on the chrome. It probably cost more than most people make in 2 years. And here it sat, blocking my ability to take care of my animals. I walked around the SUV, looking for any clues about who might own it. The license plate was from our county, so this was not some out-of-state tourist who had gotten confused. The windows were tinted, but I could see the interior was just as pristine as the exterior. Leather seats, high-tech dashboard, the works. My first instinct was to be helpful. Maybe this person was having some kind of emergency. Maybe they had pulled over to make a phone call and would be back any minute. I waited by the vehicle for about 10 minutes, expecting someone to come running out of the nearby woods or down the driveway. No one came. By 7 o'clock, I was starting to get frustrated. My cattle were gathered at the fence line, waiting for their morning feed. They have a routine just like I do, and they know when breakfast is supposed to happen. But I could not get to the feed stored in the barn because this expensive roadblock was in my way. I tried looking around the property to see if someone might be walking around, taking pictures, or exploring. Sometimes city folks like to wander around rural areas, thinking all the land is public property. But I did not see anyone. No footprints in the mud, no signs that anyone had even gotten out of the vehicle. That is when I started to realize this might not be an innocent mistake. I spent the next hour trying to track down the owner. I called my nearest neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who lives about half a mile down the road. She had not seen anyone walking around or asking for directions. I called the local gas station to see if anyone had mentioned being lost or needing help. Nothing. I even drove down to the new shopping center to see if maybe someone had left their car here and caught a ride with friends. But the shopping center was not even open yet. The parking lot was completely empty except for a few employee vehicles. By 9 o'clock, I was getting genuinely angry. My cattle were getting restless, and I had a full day of work ahead of me. I needed to get into that barn, and I needed to do it soon. I walked back to the Porsche and tried the door handles, thinking maybe I could at least move it out of the way. Locked, of course. I peered through the windows again, looking for any kind of contact information or clue about the owner. Nothing. The sun was getting higher, and the temperature was starting to climb. My cattle were now actively complaining, making the kind of low, rumbling sounds that mean they are not happy about the delay in their feeding schedule. I made a decision that would prove to be very important later. I went back to the house and got my camera. I took pictures of the Porsche from every angle, making sure to capture the license plate, the exact position blocking my barn entrance, and the timestamp on my camera showing how long this had been going on. As I was taking the photos, I heard a car door slam somewhere near the main road. I looked up, expecting to see someone jogging toward me with an apologetic wave and a reasonable explanation. Instead, I saw a woman in expensive clothes walking slowly up my gravel driveway, checking her phone and looking around like she owned the place. She was not hurrying. She was not apologetic. She looked like someone who was exactly where she intended to be. That was my first glimpse of Karen, and I could tell immediately that this was not going to be a pleasant conversation. Karen was everything I expected and worse. She looked like she had stepped out of a magazine advertisement for expensive lifestyle products. Designer handbag, perfectly styled hair, clothes that probably cost more than I spend on groceries in 6 months. She walked with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about consequences. As she got closer, I could see she was not the least bit concerned about parking her vehicle on someone else's property. No apologetic expression, no hurried pace suggesting she knew she had made a mistake. If anything, she looked annoyed that I was standing there taking pictures. "Excuse me," I called out when she was close enough to hear. "Is that your Porsche blocking my barn?" She barely glanced in my direction before looking back at her phone. "Yes, it is my car." And the casual dismissal in her voice caught me off guard. I had expected at least some acknowledgement that parking on private property without permission might be inappropriate. "Well, you are parked on my property," I said, trying to keep my tone polite. "And you are blocking my access to the barn where I keep feed for my cattle. I need you to move your vehicle, please." Karen finally looked up from her phone, but only to give me the kind of look you might give a particularly slow child. "I am just using this as a parking spot while I go shopping. It is much more convenient than trying to find a space at the shopping center." I blinked, certain I had misheard her. "You are using my farm as a parking lot." "It is not like you are using this space for anything important," she said with a wave of her hand. "It is just sitting here empty. You should be grateful that someone is bringing business to the area." The audacity of her statement left me speechless for a moment. She was not just trespassing on my property. She was acting like I should be thankful for the privilege. "Ma'am, this is a working farm," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "That barn you are blocking contains feed for my cattle. Those cattle need to eat, and this is private property. You cannot just park here because it is convenient for you." Karen rolled her eyes like I was being unreasonable. "Look, I will only be gone for a few hours. Your cows can wait. It is not like they are going anywhere." The casual dismissal of my livelihood and the needs of my animals sent a surge of anger through me. But I had been raised to be polite, especially to women and visitors. I took a deep breath and tried one more time. "I understand you find it convenient, but this really is private property. There are plenty of parking spaces at the shopping center. I need you to move your car so I can take care of my animals." Karen's expression shifted from dismissive to openly hostile. "Are you trying to tell me where I can and cannot park? This is America. I have rights too, you know." The irony of her talking about rights while violating mine was not lost on me. But I could see that reasoning with her was going to be impossible. "Yes, you do have rights," I said carefully, "but you do not have the right to park on other people's private property without permission." "Says who?" she snapped. "Are you some kind of lawyer? Do you have some kind of official documentation that says I cannot park here?" I gestured toward the obvious signs of private property around us. The barn, the house, the fencing, the cattle. "This is clearly a private farm. You do not need special documentation to know that you cannot just park on someone's land without asking." Karen pulled out her phone and started tapping on it aggressively. "We will see about that. I am going to call the police and report you for harassment. You cannot intimidate people just because you think you own everything around here." The threat was so absurd it almost made me laugh. She was trespassing on my property, blocking my access to necessary farm equipment, and now threatening to call the police on me for asking her to leave. "Ma'am, please call the police," I said, surprising her with my response. "I would be happy to explain to them how you parked on my private property without permission and are refusing to move when asked politely." For a moment, Karen looked uncertain, but then her expression hardened again. "You know what? I changed my mind. I am not moving my car. I am going to park here whenever I want to go shopping. It is convenient, it is free, and there is nothing you can do about it." With that declaration, she turned and walked back toward the road, leaving me standing there with my mouth open and my cattle still waiting for their breakfast. As I watched her disappear down my driveway, I realized this was not going to be a one-time problem. Karen had just declared war on my peaceful farm life, and she had no idea what she was getting herself into. True to her word, Karen returned the next day. Same white Porsche, same arrogant attitude, same complete disregard for my property rights. This time, she brought a friend. A silver Mercedes pulled up behind the Porsche, and out stepped another woman who looked like she had been cut from the same entitled cloth as Karen. Designer everything, expensive handbag, the kind of sunglasses that cost more than most people spend on groceries. I watched from my kitchen window as they chatted briefly, then walked off toward the shopping center together, leaving both vehicles blocking my barn access. Two expensive cars now stood between me and my ability to care for my animals. This was escalating beyond a simple misunderstanding. This was becoming a systematic invasion of my property. I spent that morning researching property rights and trespassing laws. The internet is a wonderful thing when you need to understand your legal options. What I found was both encouraging and infuriating. According to state law, I had every right to have unauthorized vehicles removed from my private property. Property owners could contact towing companies to remove vehicles that were parked without permission, as long as proper signage was posted and certain procedures were followed. The infuriating part was learning that this kind of thing happens more often than you might think. Entitled people using private property as their personal parking lot is apparently a growing problem, especially near shopping centers and entertainment districts. I also discovered that I could document the trespassing and potentially pursue legal action if the problem continued. Every instance of unauthorized parking could be photographed, timed, and logged as evidence of ongoing trespassing. That afternoon, I called the county sheriff's office to ask about my options. The deputy I spoke with was sympathetic and knowledgeable. "You have every right to have those vehicles towed," he told me. "As long as you post proper signage warning about unauthorized parking and towing, you can have any vehicle removed from your private property. The owners will be responsible for all towing and storage fees." "What kind of signage do I need?" I asked. "Something clearly visible that warns about towing for unauthorized parking. You can buy the signs at most hardware stores or have them custom made. The important thing is that they are posted where drivers can reasonably be expected to see them." I thanked the deputy and hung up, feeling both relieved and determined. I had legal options. I just needed to be smart about how I used them. The next day, Karen showed up again. This time she was alone, but she seemed even more confident than before. She parked her Porsche in the exact same spot, walked past me without acknowledgement, and headed off to her shopping expedition. When she returned 3 hours later, I was waiting for her. "We need to talk," I said as she approached her vehicle. Karen looked at me like I was something unpleasant she had stepped in. "About what?" "I told you already I am going to park here whenever I want. Deal with it." "Actually, you are not," I said calmly. "This is my private property and you are trespassing. I am asking you one final time to stop parking here." Karen laughed, actually laughed at my request. "Or what? You are going to call your lawyer, sue me. Go ahead. I would love to see you try to prove that I am causing you any real damage by parking on your precious dirt." "I do not need to prove damage," I replied. I just need to prove trespassing, which is pretty easy when you admit to parking on someone else's property without permission." For a moment, Karen looked less certain, but then her arrogance returned full force. "You know what your problem is," she said, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at my chest. "You think you are better than everyone else just because you live out here in the middle of nowhere. Well, news flash, country boy. The world does not revolve around you and your stupid cows." She climbed into her Porsche and started the engine. But before driving away, she rolled down her window and delivered what she thought was the final word. "I am going to park here every single day from now on, and if you try to stop me, I will make so much trouble for you that you will wish you had never been born." As she drove away, I realized that Karen had just made a critical mistake. She had threatened me. In my experience, people who make threats like that usually do not expect the other person to fight back. But Karen had picked the wrong farmer to mess with. That evening, I called my friend Jake. We had known each other since high school, and he now owned a successful towing company about 20 minutes away. Jake had built his business on being professional, reliable, and completely above board in everything he did. "Jake, I need some advice about a trespassing situation," I said after we had caught up on family news. "What kind of trespassing?" he asked. I explained the situation with Karen and her daily parking routine. Jake listened without interrupting, making occasional sounds of disbelief as I described her attitude and threats. "So she is basically using your farm as a free parking lot," Jake said when I finished. "And she threatened you when you asked her to stop." "That is about the size of it," I confirmed. "The sheriff's deputy said I could have vehicles towed for unauthorized parking if I post proper signage." "Absolutely," Jake agreed. "I do private property towing all the time. Apartment complexes, businesses, private homeowners. As long as the signage is proper and the vehicle is genuinely trespassing, we can remove it legally." "What kind of signage do I need?" "Something that clearly states unauthorized parking is prohibited and that vehicles will be towed at the owner's expense. The signs need to be visible from where someone would normally park. I can send you some examples of what we usually recommend." We talked for another few minutes about the logistics and legal requirements. Jake assured me that everything would be done by the book, with proper documentation and procedures. But as we were wrapping up the conversation, an idea started forming in my mind. A deliciously perfect idea. "Jake, let me ask you a hypothetical question," I said. "When you tow a vehicle from private property, where do you usually take it?" "To our lot," he replied. "We have a secure facility where vehicles are stored until the owners pay the fees and pick them up." "But what if the property owner requested that the vehicle be moved to a different location on their own property? Somewhere that was not blocking access but was still technically on their land?" There was a pause as Jake thought about this. "Well, I suppose that would be up to the property owner. As long as the vehicle was not blocking anything important and the owner could access it to retrieve it, I do not see any legal problem with that. Even if that location was, say, a pasture." Jake chuckled. "Tom, what are you planning?" "Nothing illegal," I assured him. "Just making sure that Karen gets the convenient parking she asked for." After we hung up, I walked out to survey my property with new eyes. Behind the main barn, about 200 yards from the house, sat my back pasture. It was where I kept some of my older cattle, the ones who were more interested in grazing peacefully than causing trouble. The pasture had everything Karen could want in a parking spot. It was flat, easily accessible by tow truck, and technically still on my property just like she had requested. The fact that it was also home to 8 curious cows and had not been cleaned in several weeks was just a bonus. The next morning, I drove to the hardware store and purchased 2 large signs. They were not fancy, but they were clear and legally compliant. Private property, no unauthorized parking vehicles will be towed at owner's expense. I posted one sign at the entrance to my driveway and another right next to the barn where Karen liked to park. Both signs were clearly visible and impossible to miss. I even took pictures of the signs and their placement for my records. Then I called Jake and scheduled a consultation for the following day. If Karen showed up and parked despite the clear signage, we would have everything we needed to take action. I spent that evening preparing for what I hoped would be Karen's final visit to my farm. I made sure my camera was charged and ready. I reviewed the local trespassing laws one more time, and I walked out to the back pasture to introduce myself to the cows who would soon have a very surprised visitor. The cattle looked at me with mild interest as I explained what might happen over the next few days. They were good cows, calm and friendly, but naturally curious about anything new in their environment. I had a feeling they were going to be very interested in Karen's pristine white Porsche. The next morning, I positioned myself where I could see the driveway and waited. Karen had been coming around 10 o'clock most days, which gave her plenty of time for a leisurely shopping trip before the afternoon heat became unbearable. At 10:15, I saw the familiar white SUV turn into my driveway. My heart rate picked up as I watched Karen drive past the first warning sign without slowing down. She parked in her usual spot, directly in front of the second sign, and climbed out of her vehicle. I watched as she glanced at the new signage, read it completely, and then looked around as if searching for someone to object to her presence. When she did not see me immediately, she shrugged and started walking toward the road. Karen had just made the biggest mistake of her entitled life. She had seen the warnings, understood the consequences, and chosen to ignore them anyway. I waited until she was well out of sight, then called Jake. "It is time," I said simply. "I will be there in 20 minutes," Jake replied. The plan was in motion, and there was no turning back now. Jake arrived right on schedule, driving his professional tow truck with the company logo and contact information clearly displayed. He was dressed in his standard work uniform and carried a clipboard with all the necessary paperwork. "Are you sure about this, Tom?" he asked as we walked toward Karen's Porsche. "Absolutely," I replied. "She saw the signs, she understands this is private property, and she chose to park here anyway. She asked for convenient parking on my land, and that is exactly what she is going to get." Jake began the process of documenting the tow. He took pictures of the vehicle's position, the clearly posted signage, and the license plate. Everything was done by the book, with proper paperwork and legal procedures. "Where exactly do you want me to put it?" Jake asked as he prepared the tow equipment. I pointed toward the back pasture. "Right there, in the middle of that field. Make sure it is far enough from the fence that she can get to it, but close enough to the cows that they can satisfy their curiosity." Jake grinned as he realized what I had in mind. "Tom, you are diabolical, I like it." The towing process took about 15 minutes. Jake was efficient and professional, carefully lifting the Porsche onto his truck and transporting it to its new location. The cows watched with great interest as the pristine white SUV was gently lowered into their domain. Within minutes of the tow truck leaving, the cattle had surrounded Karen's vehicle. They sniffed at the unfamiliar metal and glass, leaving nose prints on the windows and doors. A few of the more adventurous cows rubbed against the sides, leaving behind evidence of their recent roll in the mud. I positioned myself on my front porch with a clear view of both the driveway and the back pasture. All I had to do now was wait for Karen to return from her shopping expedition. She arrived at exactly 2:30, right on schedule. I watched as she pulled into my driveway in what I assumed was a friend's car, probably expecting to retrieve her Porsche and continue her day as usual. But when she reached the spot where she had left her vehicle, confusion replaced confidence. Karen got out of the borrowed car and looked around frantically, as if her Porsche might be hiding behind the barn or under a tarp. "Hello there," I called out, walking slowly toward her. "Can I help you with something?" Karen spun around, her face already flushed with anger and panic. "Where is my car? What did you do with my car?" "Your car," I replied innocently. "Oh, you mean your Porsche. It is parked exactly where you wanted it, right here on my property just like you requested." "What are you talking about? I parked it right here and now it is gone." I pointed toward the back pasture, where Karen's white SUV was clearly visible among my grazing cattle. "There it is, safely parked on my property just like you insisted." Karen followed my gesture and froze when she saw her pristine vehicle surrounded by curious cows in the muddy field. For a moment, she seemed unable to process what she was seeing. Then the screaming started. "You cannot do this," she shrieked. "This is illegal, this is theft, I am calling the police right now." "Please do," I said calmly. "I would be happy to explain to them how I had an illegally parked vehicle removed from my private property after posting proper warning signs." Karen was already dialing her phone, but her hands were shaking so badly she kept hitting the wrong numbers. When she finally got through to someone, her voice was so high and frantic that I could hear the dispatcher asking her to calm down and speak clearly. "Someone stole my car," she shouted into the phone. "They moved it into a field with cows. This is crazy." I could not hear the dispatcher's response, but I could see Karen's face getting redder as she tried to explain the situation. After a few minutes of increasingly frustrated conversation, she hung up and glared at me. "The police are on their way," she announced, as if this was some kind of threat. "Excellent," I replied. "They will be able to see the warning signs and confirm that you were trespassing on private property." For the first time since I had met her, Karen looked uncertain. She glanced toward the signs, then back at her car in the pasture, then at me. "You have to move my car back," she said, but her voice had lost its commanding tone. "You cannot just leave it out there with those animals." "Actually, I can," I said. "It is my property, and the vehicle was parked there illegally. The towing company moved it to a safe location where it is not blocking any access roads or causing any problems." "But there are cows," Karen protested. "Yes, there are. They seem very interested in your vehicle. I think they like the color." As if on cue, one of my cows chose that moment to investigate the Porsche's side mirror, leaving a long streak of mud and saliva across the pristine white paint. Karen made a sound that was part scream and part sob. "This is insane. You cannot treat people this way." "I am treating you exactly the way you asked to be treated," I replied. "You wanted to park on my property for your convenience. You refused to leave when asked politely. You ignored clear warning signs, and you threatened me when I told you this was illegal." The sound of approaching sirens cut off Karen's response. A county sheriff's deputy pulled into my driveway, followed by what looked like Karen's friend in the same car she had arrived in. As the deputy got out of his vehicle, I could see this was going to be a very interesting conversation. Deputy Martinez was professional and thorough. He listened to Karen's increasingly frantic explanation of events, took notes, and examined the warning signs I had posted. Then he asked to see the documentation from the towing company. Jake had done everything perfectly. The paperwork was complete, the procedures were legal, and the signage met all requirements. Deputy Martinez reviewed everything carefully before delivering his verdict. "Ma'am, I understand you are upset about your vehicle's location," he said to Karen, "but the property owner was within his rights to have it towed. You parked on private property without permission, despite clear signage warning about the consequences." "But they put it in a field with cows," Karen protested. "The vehicle was moved to a safe location on the same property where it was illegally parked," Deputy Martinez replied. "The property owner chose to keep it on his land rather than have it taken to an impound lot, which actually saves you significant fees." I could see the moment Karen realized that the law was not going to rescue her from this situation. Her shoulders sagged, and she looked toward her muddy Porsche with something approaching despair. "How am I supposed to get it out of there?" she asked. "Very carefully," I suggested. "I have some old boots you can borrow if you need them." Deputy Martinez managed to keep a straight face, but I could see he was struggling not to smile. "Ma'am, you will need to coordinate with the property owner to retrieve your vehicle. This is a civil matter between you and him." After the deputy left, Karen stood at the edge of my pasture for nearly 10 minutes, staring at her car and trying to work up the courage to wade through the mud and cow manure to reach it. The cows had lost interest in the vehicle by then, but they had left plenty of evidence of their investigation. Finally, Karen asked if she could borrow those boots I had mentioned. I brought her a pair of old rubber boots from the barn, the kind I use for the messiest farm work. The walk across the pasture was a masterpiece of poetic justice. Karen picked her way carefully through the mud, trying to avoid the worst of the mess, while her expensive clothes absorbed the essence of farm life. The cows watched her progress with mild interest, probably wondering why this strange new creature was making such a fuss about a little dirt. When Karen finally reached her Porsche, she discovered that the cows had been even more thorough in their inspection than I had realized. Every surface was decorated with mud, manure, or saliva. The pristine white paint was now an abstract artwork of brown and green. It took her another 10 minutes to clean off the door handle enough to get inside the vehicle. The engine started immediately, which was a relief for both of us. But getting the SUV out of the soft pasture ground required some careful maneuvering and a few tense moments when the wheels spun in the mud. Eventually, Karen managed to drive her once pristine Porsche back to solid ground. She climbed out, handed me the borrowed boots without a word, and walked back to her friend's car. As they drove away, I could see Karen on her phone, probably calling every car wash and detailing service in the county. I never saw Karen again after that day. Word must have spread through her social circle about what happened, because I never had any more problems with unauthorized parking on my property. The warning sign stayed up, serving as a reminder to anyone who might be tempted to use my farm as their personal convenience. Most people seemed to get the message. My cattle went back to their normal routine, though they occasionally wandered over to the spot where the Porsche had been parked, as if hopping for another interesting visitor. Sometimes the best revenge is simply giving people exactly what they ask for.